Hi Marisol, it's great to have you here.
Thank
Thank you for being with us today and for coming to talk to us a little bit about your career narratives. I was hoping that you could start just by telling us a little bit about your work at Davis and your dissertation and what that project entailed.
Sure. So I was in the Cultural Studies program at UC Davis, and I graduated in 2009. And my dissertation was called The Ecology of Scatology. I was really interested in kind of normative constructions of the body, and particularly the excretory body, and by normative I mean kind of cultural norms of shame and disgust around embodiment, and what the ways that that was the product of a capitalist relations to nature within capitalist modernity. So you know, what were the material conditions for that shame or that disgust around embodiment, both material in the sense of the historical construction, but also materialist in the sense of its ecological construction. So how our cities, how our communities, how our bodies kind of produced by a particular relationship to nature that's specific to capitalist modernity. So cultural studies, of course, is interdisciplinary, and so my project kind of pulled together different, because one of the arguments was that while we think that waste is out of sight, out of mind, if we do understand waste in an ecological sense, we know that it doesn't go away, it just gets displaced. And so I was interested in sort of the materiality of that displacement. And so I wanted to challenge the idea that, I mean, kind of, it's sort of like a Foucauldian point, right? Like, it actually isn't the case that we never talk about shit, we never talk about excrement or excreta, right? In fact, like, there are various places that those representations appear to us, and so what kind of argument can we make if we look at different kinds of scatological culture or different appearances of waste? So when I started the project, it was really kind of literary, because my BA was in English, and so I was looking at kind of scatological fiction, like horror fiction, and scatological kind of like, you know, films like, or not films, but I guess they were films in a way, like the Jackass series, right? So kind of humorous and slapstick uses of the scatological in relation to like particular gendered constructions and racialized constructions of masculinity, of white masculinity. But then, like, by the end of my project and the end of my dissertation writing, it became very kind of sociological. Like, the more I went into the topic, the more I realized that in order to understand those representations, that I had to look at things like the history of sewers, right, within U.S. cities or globally. I had to look at sort of contemporary practices of waste management and the infrastructures and the policies and the practices that made shit seem to go away, and also kind of the social and cultural mechanisms of displacement that relocated waste from you know, domestic spaces to communities that themselves were understood to be disposable, sort of, you know, the appropriate sites for relocating waste. So, so by the time my project concluded, in the last chapter I ended with, I was looking at the practice of reclaiming sewage sludge in order to compost it and turn it into fertilizer, and kind of looking at, I did a comparative look at how that practice played out when New York City sludge was sent to this little, basically colonia on the border, on the Texas-Mexico border, versus the way that project happens in Austin, Texas, which is sort of very, the rhetoric is very much, it's reclamation, it's, we're doing this, we kind of understand the way that we're embedded in nature, and we come to, our consciousness is transformed by our understanding of where waste goes and the fact that we're part of nature, we're not separate. So very different kinds of encounters with waste, and that was ethnographic. I did in ethnography. So I ended up in a very different place than where I began, but I was trying to tie all of those appearances together in order to kind of make an argument about the materiality of displacement.
That sounds like a fascinating project. And do you feel like the fact that you kind of changed methods made you more interested in nonprofit work or work that would be alongside the academy?
I think so, because I guess one of the things that I gained from that shift methodologically was a much richer understanding of how power operated, and how relationships of domination and resistance operated. And in a way, I kind of like went full circle, because what I was doing before I went to graduate school was working as an organizer, as a community organizer, in some environmental justice struggles that were happening at my home community of San Antonio around water. And so by the time I kind of circled back to, I ended up circling back to that, right, and wanting to really understand like the environmental justice politics of waste and waste disposal, and also kind of seeing that there was this gap within organizing for, there was this need for theory, for organizing to be informed by theoretical understandings of power.
Is that what pushed you into grad school? Is kind of this theoretical gap that you saw?
I'm sorry, say again?
Oh, is that kind of what pushed you into grad school from community organizing? Is that part of why you were drawn to?
It wasn't so linear as that, I think. I mean, because when I came out of, when I got done with my undergrad, I knew that I wanted to continue, and so I started applying. But in the meantime, I got involved in organizing work, and kind of like it awakened something in me. But then, like by that time, I had already been accepted into Davis and knew I was going. So that felt like it kind of got interrupted. But I should say too that even though, like my first foray, my first post-academic or alt-academic foray was in a nonprofit context, that I don't necessarily understand my shift as my institutional shift as moving from academia to nonprofit work. Like, I understand myself as a scholar who works in the community, and a scholar for whom it's very important to be deeply accountable to community struggles and to social movement building, and that has different faces, right? So right now I'm not doing nonprofit work. Right now I'm just I'm freelancing. I'm working as a scholar to assist in the production of a report that's going to inform kind of the organizing work that we've done in San Antonio around gentrification and the politics of urban development. So, and I'm doing some other stuff on the side that's like very kind of not related to my original set. I mean, it's interesting, but like, I'm just doing it because I need the income, but also because it's really cool to think that I can continue to work as a scholar. I can, or not even just as a scholar, but that there can be a kind of intellectual work, kind of knowledge work that is much more applied and much more like its end really is like the transformation of society, right? In these ways, So yeah, I think of myself as a community scholar primarily, and not necessarily as a nonprofit. Yeah,
So,
it can just take that form. Yeah.
well, as a community scholar, how do you get integrated into your community? How do you integrate your theoretical knowledge and the skills that you bring to bear? How do you make that sort of legible to the community? And how do you really kind of get in there and find those both freelancing jobs and also um, possibly, nonprofit jobs that are going to be most effective or let you do that kind of knowledge work?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the case of my work with Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, uh, and I should maybe preface that and say, just, I did, after I graduated, I was working in an academic context. I had gotten one of the new faculty fellowships, and I was at the University of Kansas as a visiting assistant professor. But I felt this profound longing to figure out what it would mean to do that work in service of social movements, to figure out what that praxis would look like, and it's an open question. It's still an open question. Like, I don't know. But I still have that longing. Like, I think there must be a way, and if the way isn't established, like, it has to be created. So Esperanza, I had worked with off and on over the years as I would come in and out of San Antonio. I mean, so I already knew them and they knew me. I worked with them after college, kind of when I was doing the work around water. And assisting with community organizing efforts there. They were involved in that struggle. So they knew me already, and I knew their work, and I supported their work. And so, and I had done, I guess, when I was doing the fellowship, I continued to, I'd come home for the summer, I'd come home for winter break, and I would do work with them. And when I began to sort of like let myself do what I long to do, instead of, saying, oh, I can't, I can't, I've been trained to do this, and and I've succeeded, and I, it's sort of sit with that longing to figure out what it would mean to be a community scholar. At that point, I got in touch with them, and I said, hey, I think I'm probably going to move back home, and I want to basically like offer the work that I do. And I guess I'd had a couple of conversations already with the director where we had sort of talked about her interest for the organization in developing like a community school program, like a popular education program. And so she already kind of knew that I was interested in that. I already kind of knew she was interested in that. And so when I approached her, she essentially, she said, yeah, if you come back here, then you can work in this context and develop that program. So once I knew that there was something, that there was something to sort of like, I wasn't just going to sort of like be in free fall, like make that jump and have there be nothing, then I felt better about making that jump. So that work, that possibility kind of emerged from like years and years and years of already being involved in the community, right? The freelancing work kind of, I didn't look for it. It kind of found me, but it found me by way of my, my involvement. The report that we're doing on gentrification, I'm working with somebody that I've known for a long time and who's been one of my mentors, and she's on a task force on gentrification in the city, and at Esperanza, like, kind of the bulk of what we, a lot of what we did in the community school was to try to create a radical discussion of urban development politics. And so I ended up doing a lot of stuff around gentrification. And so I think sort of to get back to the main question of like how do you find that work? Um, I don't know. But I think that things open up when you're embedded in if you're embedded in the community, when people know your work, right? When people know that your work is good.
So what would I guess a day in the life look like when you were working at Esperanza or what you're doing now? Because it's very different, I think, than uh, other kinds of work. So what would you
It's pretty
work?
different. Well, at Esperanza, so Esperanza is primarily, in terms of what they get funded for, is primarily a cultural arts organization. So they get money from the city and they get money from foundations and they get some grassroots funding primarily to do cultural programming. So, and they are a social justice organization, so they use the arts to bring people together around different social justice issues, and they're very much kind of rooted in third wave feminist politics of intersectionality. So, you know, their cultural programming is focused on everything from we did an art exhibit on fracking. They do a lot of LGBT work. Kind of, they're known as they're the kind of oldest queer-led organizations in San Antonio, in Texas. They do stuff. So they do stuff around, feminist issues, labor issues. They're very involved in city politics and kind of challenging the ways that, relationships of domination and oppression play out on a local level. So that's primarily what they do. They organize film screenings. They organize kind of alternative, like fair trade markets. They organize what are some concerts, art exhibits, but then they're also, there's this sort of like tension between the cultural arts work they do and then like the community organizing that they get involved in. So all of that is to say that on a given day at Esperanza, I could be, I'm coming up with a list of food to get for an event. I'm getting the building ready for an event. I'm cleaning toilets and I'm sweeping floors, but I'm also setting up meetings with people in the city to try to like move the gentrification work or the organizing work forward. I'm setting up meetings in the community to have organizing conversations, strategy conversations about on different campaigns. So there was always kind of this tension at Esperanza between sort of the long term, and I think especially like my kind of my area or my focus at that organization, since it was about the sort of building of a program or the development of a community school, like there was a tension between like the long term work of figuring out how to develop that, and then sort of like the everyday urgency of like, oh my God, like we have this concert coming up on the weekend and we need to do this, that, and the other to get ready for it. We need to make flyers, or not flyers, but we need to do outreach. We need to make calls to get people to come. So on a day-to-day basis, like it was kind of all of that together. Yeah.
So your dissertation seems so perfect for setting you up for this kind of work in certain ways, the relationships between power, or the understanding of power that you have from that work. But did you do anything at Davis that helped you with this kind of programming side, that helped prepare you to step in and do all of this kind of practical work that I think a lot of times PhDs aren't really considered to be great at?
Yeah, I'm not great at it. I mean, at Esperanza, I really loved the community school work, but the programming stuff, like, I had to do it, but I could take it or leave it. Like, it was really cool to see like an event come together and to see kind of how the community um, was touched and transformed by those events, but kind of the yeah, that work, like, I'm not so good at. But I'm trying to think. I mean, I think the thing that like graduate training did prepare me for more than I would have thought was the community organizing side. Um, because I had had experience, in front of a group of 20 people, having to lead a discussion and having to sort of navigate tensions between people and to come with to develop a kind of agenda and keep people on track. And um, I wasn't afraid. I mean, I still don't really like public speaking, but I could do it, right? I could do things like that. I could yeah, so that was really that that helped me a lot. And I think like also just the theoretical training has been really important, like because when you're organizing or when you're working on that day to day, like really nitty gritty, like urgent kinds of stuff, um, there's no there's no time for reflection. There's no time to sort of connect the macro to the micro, and so um, a lot of the work that I tried to do there was to create a space that didn't exist for us to understand kind of the root causes of things we were dealing with on a day-to-day level, and to connect the dots, right? To collectively produce an analysis that would connect the dots between different issues or between, our knowledge of these structures of power and sort of what we are dealing with in our day-to-day lives. So, I mean, but what I can say about the other work, like the programming work, is like it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard to learn, and really like I've learned like I learned a lot of skills that I didn't learn in graduate school. I can if I'm applying for another nonprofit position, I can say like, yes, I've done event planning. Yes, I've done administrative work. Like I've acquired these skills that I didn't get.
Yeah. Also, I was kind of wondering about collaboration because you were talking about those sort of, it seems like almost group writing projects that the freelance work is.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's a lot of collaboration at Esperanza, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you could talk about the way the PhD did or didn't prepare you for that kind of collaboration.
Right. Definitely a very different way of working. Um, yeah, like I think the conventional ways of writing and producing new ideas is very solitary. Like that's the conventional model, right? But there are other ways of working. I things like participatory action research, right? Um, that comes out of more of a social science kind of field where it is more common for people to work together, right? And then it's still not the norm, but even within that field, there are these practices where of university people collaborating with community people in order to produce new knowledge, right? That speaks directly to what people need, what people in the community need. So I was a little familiar with those ways of working, but definitely, the bulk of the work that I did as an academic was very solitary. And I'm not going to knock that. Like, I mean, this project that I'm doing now on gentrification is totally with a bunch of other people and different people contributing different pieces, and there sort of being a wider community of collaborators and audiences. But at the same time, like I want to bottom line it. Like I want to say what I want to say. I mean, I want to be the person who's kind of like the primary investigator, I guess, if we're thinking in those terms. I want to bring it together. Like there's something real satisfying, I think, and something that I end up missing when it's purely collaborative. and just being able to like make the argument you want to make, right? But I guess the other thing I've learned too is that there can be different um, moments for different kinds of working together. Like sometimes it's appropriate to just write something yourself. Sometimes it's appropriate or strategic to collaborate with others. Um, so kind of knowing when to do what is important.
Yeah, so we only have time for one more question. This has flown by. But I was wondering, what would your best advice be to someone who is really considering alternative paths after academia? What would you say to that person, that imaginary person who is looking for a different path, and maybe for some of the same reasons that you were, right? So an interest in social justice that really the academy doesn't serve.
Yeah, I would say like listen to and trust your longing, your desire, and don't internalize um, shame. Like don't internalize any kind of normative ideas about what a person should do with their life now that they have a PhD, right? We can never let go in doing theory of the need to figure out what that theory becomes when we put into practice. But we can't either focus just on action and let go of the need to have a good theoretical understanding of what we're doing. So it's figuring out a way that tension can be not unified, not that it can be productive, right? Because you're never going to get rid of it, and you wouldn't want to get rid of it, right? Resist the tendency to think of like community work and academic work as mutually exclusive, because I still, when I came back from the University of Kansas to San Antonio, and I was teaching, I was actually working as Esperanza and teaching some courses at Texas A&M San Antonio. And I, once January hits, I'm going to start putting in all my applications again to different universities. I think the larger kind of point, or the larger piece of advice, is that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You can figure out ways to do intellectual work that still has a relationship to universities, has a relationship to communities. Sometimes it looks like freelancing, sometimes it looks like nonprofit work, sometimes it looks like straight up community organizing, sometimes it looks like university teaching. I think that one of the things that is challenging about that is sort of giving up the idea, being forced to give up the idea or the kind of dream of a career, if we mean career as kind of stable, one single thing that you do that's very stable, very assured. Like my lived reality is much more kind of piecework right now, which is in some ways really scary, and in some ways is exactly like the way I need to live my life, so that I can live in the community that I want and do intellectual work that's accountable to that community. I can be close to my family. I can still have, I still can do work that I haven't abandoned a sense of myself as a scholar. I just do different things, I piece together different things. So it's freeing, it's both scary, and it's liberating.